Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to see so many faces. We have a really, what I hope will be an exciting program for you. It turns out, in a funny kind of statement of events, we've been getting increasing calls for doing something for advocacy for years from volunteers. And it was always a challenge because the work that we do is a pretty deep, hard slog. It doesn't lend itself to one-offs. So last year, for the first time, we decided let's do an advocacy day where it's essentially a teach-in. Where we use our staff and share our knowledge and lead a discussion. And it was so successful, it made us realize, oh, I don't know why we were trying so hard to find one-off activities. Advocacy is really what we do, and this is a great idea. So as a result, welcome to our second annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Advocacy on behalf of immigrants and refugees. We are really glad to have you, and we're really glad that our light bulb moment last year resulted in something that was very easy to do virtually. So there you go. We know that all of you have watched the mounting anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies of the last 4 years in horror, and that many, if not most of you, have done a great deal on your own in partnership with us or in partnership with other organizations to fight all of these bad policies and bad rhetoric. But today marks the penultimate day of this administration and hopefully these virulent anti-immigrant policies. Therefore, I thought it would be good to take a moment, take a deep breath, everybody together, and smile at one another for the work we have all done together and for those that we were able to welcome despite everything during this crisis. So we want to start off on a positive note. So I'm going to look at all of you that are on camera. I want to see you take a deep breath. I want to see you smile around the squares like Brady Bunch, right? We're starting off positive, and we are ready to jump in. So, last Martin Luther King Jr. Day, 5 months before the killing of George Floyd by police, we chose to focus our advocacy around seeing the connections between race and immigration policies. More accurately, the connections between white supremacy and the structurally racist immigration system. We learned that these connections go back to HIAS, Pennsylvania's founding in the 1880s and persisted up through and including this moment. The last 4 years merely capitalized on a foundation that was built by others and was not new. Similarly, the cries of injustice that gave birth to the critically important Black Lives Matter movement necessarily reached a crescendo this summer, but have been decades or perhaps centuries really in the making. As we look forward, we know that we still have such a long way to go. The rollbacks alone of the harm that's been done will take a long time. And there's so much more than rollbacks that we want to see as we build towards a better immigration system that recognizes all that immigrants bring to our nation. Despite this, we're beginning to feel that we can start at HIAS, Pennsylvania at least, to move forward more strategically and more offensively, rather than constantly being on the defensive. At a minimum, we can look forward to a federal government who will not be our client's enemy, even if there will be continuously more to do to ensure that our clients are welcomed as the friends that they are. But that minimum gives us an opening that we've decided this year to seize upon. It allows us the space to focus on advocacy for immigrants more close to home. This year, as we look forward with hope, we want to focus our advocacy efforts around fixing local problems. We've picked 3 in particular, and we hope you leave today's event knowing a lot more about how everyday life in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia is unnecessarily challenged for immigrants, particularly immigrants of color, and what you all can do to eradicate those challenges. So, of course, we're going to start with some fun because no HIASP event exists without fun. We're going to start with games to test your knowledge and warm up the crowd. I'm going to give you some scenarios, and Rebecca's going to put a polling thing up so that you can vote on what you think the answer is. Now, we're not going to be able to identify who voted for what, so don't be shy or worried about being wrong. The point of today is to learn. Okay, so do I have everybody? Everybody get it? All right. So I'm going to give you my first scenario, and you have to vote simply yes or no. And you can see immigration quizzo. So you can read along while I say, fleeing gang violence, Sandra, her parents brought her to the US when she was 8 years old. Undocumented, she received DACA, went to medical school, and is now working as a doctor on the front lines of the pandemic. Does Sandra have a path to citizenship?
No.
So vote yes, no, or maybe.
No, right now.
Well, click on the link. Does this person have a path to citizenship based solely on the information given? I'm going to give you the second scenario. Quasi came to the US as an unaccompanied minor who had been abused by his parents in his home country of Ghana. Does Quasi have a path to citizenship?
No.
Okay, vote on the poll. Third question. Does this person have a path to citizenship based solely on the information given? Mardia, a 50-year-old Liberian woman, has been living with temporary protected status in the United States since 2002. Does Mardia have a path to citizenship? Lynn came to the United States from China on a school trip 10 years ago. He fell in love and never went back to China, but never got married. Does Lynn have a path to citizenship? Okay, finally, in what year did Philadelphians vote to amend the Home Rule Charter to require all city agencies to provide language access services? Who is required to provide language interpretation in Pennsylvania? The Department of Motor Vehicles, CVS and the mom and pop pharmacy on your block, Mrs. Stone, your child's first grade teacher, prisons and detention centers, or all of the above? How many bilingual counseling assistants are employed by the Philadelphia School District? How many bilingual counseling assistants speak languages primarily spoken in the home by Black immigrants? What percentage of Philadelphia's foreign-born are Africans? And finally, which of these people would be provided a lawyer by the state of Pennsylvania? Someone in jail who's been accused of burglary, someone whose child might be taken away in family court, an immigrant in detention, all of the above, or none of the above? Okay, so has everybody had a chance to answer all the questions? Okay, let's go over the answers. So in the first scenario, Sandra's parents fled gang violence, and she got DACA, and now she's a doctor on the front lines of the pandemic. Does she have a path to citizenship? How many of you thought no? Show of hands. Yes, no is the correct answer. Okay. Now we're going to move to Quasi, who was an unaccompanied minor abused by his parents in the home country of Ghana. Does Quasi have a path to citizenship? The answer is yes. There is something called special immigrant juvenile status that allows him to stabilize his legal status and then ultimately file for citizenship. Okay, then we move to Mardia, the Liberian woman. Does she have a path to citizenship? So the answer, just recently confirmed by our federal government, is yes. The Liberian Refugee Immigrant Fairness Act was passed, actually shockingly, in December of 2020. That gave a year to Liberians to, sorry, not December of 2020, December of 2019, that gave a year to Liberians to petition for citizenship. And then in December of 2020, that Fairness Act deadline was extended another year. So now there is an additional year for Liberians who are here living with TPS to seek citizenship. And finally, Lynn, who overstayed his visa because he fell in love. Does he have a path to citizenship, even though he's been here for a decade? The answer is no. Now, in terms of language access, we asked, what year did Philadelphians vote to amend the Home Rule Charter to require all city agencies to provide language access services? The answer was 2015. And if you're not, you should be shocked at how recent that was, given how long immigrants have been coming to Philadelphia and trying to navigate city services without language access. Who's required to provide language interpretation in Pennsylvania? The answer, thank goodness, is all of the above. Although, as you'll learn today, despite being required by federal law, there are lots of gaps in what the law requires. Next, how many bilingual counseling assistants are employed by the Philadelphia School District? You may be shocked to learn 95. I know I was. That's a pretty big number. Of those 95, how many speak Swahili? 0. How many speak languages spoken in the home by Black immigrants? 1. Yet what percentage of foreign-born are Africans in Philadelphia? 12.3%, more than 12%. And finally, which of those people would be provided a lawyer by the state of Pennsylvania? None of the above. And we're going to talk more about why that is, even though we know from headlines that there is a right to free counsel, at least for some people in Pennsylvania. But how many are provided by the state? In other words, funded by the state? None. So I hope you found that quiz and the answers enlightening. Now that we're warmed up, we're going to go into breakout groups. They're going to be random to get to know each other a little better and discuss the answers to the following questions, which we're going to put in the chat. Before we break up, though, I want to note that there's a lot more questions than we have time. We have about 10 minutes for this breakout session and 5 or 6 questions. You don't have to answer all of the questions. We simply thought they were a good way to get the conversation flowing around these issues. Each group will be facilitated by a staff or a board member. So without further ado, we're going to break out into those rooms. Buddy, I hope that was fun. I hope everybody did a little bit of bonding. We're going to dive in right now to our substantive presentations. As I indicated in our opening, today's advocacy is going to focus on local and state issues. So specifically, the first issue we're going to talk about is the Swahili speaking community and the lack of BCAs and counseling assistance for that community. So to tell us more about that, we're going to have our very own Valerie Harteg, who is our program manager for our education team. Val is really, I can't say enough about how superb she is. She's the one who brought this issue to our advocacy team's attention. She is a fierce advocate and a fabulous person for our multilingual kids and our diverse kids. She does everything with from a trauma-informed approach, and has lots of in-depth knowledge to share. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Val. And
thank you, Kathy. Such a kind introduction. Thank you so much, everybody. Great to be here with you today, and I'm really grateful to the management team for selecting this as one of our issues to talk about. And I know that our families and our fellow advocates across the city would be grateful too. So I'm also going to start out with a quiz question. So you're going to utilize the chat for this. So I'd like everybody to type into the chat the countries, and I'm speaking again about the Swahili BCA challenge that we have in the city, but the countries that you believe have a large population of Swahili speakers. So can you name, and type in the chat, the countries in which a large percentage of the population speaks Swahili? So I'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute. Okay, I'm seeing Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Kenya, yeah, Nigeria, Tanzania. Ooh, we're missing a big one here. A country where many of our refugee clients come from. I'm seeing a lot of them. Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, Congo. Aha, okay, it's starting to pop up. Congo, DRC, Burundi, yes, great. All right, you guys are good. I'm just gonna quickly share my screen and just show, oh, Becca, can you give me permission for that? Is that okay?
Yep, one sec.
Wonderful. I'm seeing Sudan. So Sudan is surprising. So Sudan, the language that is most commonly spoken in Sudan is actually Arabic. All right. So I'm just going to show you a little map here that I found. So many of you mentioned Kenya and Tanzania. So you're absolutely right about that. And Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi, neighboring countries. And then a big part here of the DRC, right, is an area where Swahili is spoken, and we've received historically and continue to receive refugees regularly coming from the Congo, and so we see folks who speak a local dialect, and then we'll often also speak Swahili and or French. So Swahili is a language that is kind of spread out across these countries here. So the Office of Family and Community Engagement at the School District of Philadelphia is the office where kind of the heartbeat of support for multilingual students and families live. This is also the department that oversees the 95 bilingual counseling assistants that Kathy mentioned in our quiz. This is one of my really good, he's become a great friend. He's now a translator in the office there, but this is Mr. El Khattab, and he is from Sudan. He was a doctor in Sudan, actually, and now practices as an official interpreter and translator with the school district. He served as a bilingual counseling assistant at several of the schools where we have a lot of our refugee families with children who attend those schools. And so he is one of the 95. Over here, I have a picture of one of the churches here in Philly that has become home to many refugees who are Swahili speaking, many of whom are Congolese. So South Philly is a big area for resettlement and a large area where we've resettled a lot of our Congolese families. And the churches several of the churches have kind of become these wonderful homes for really diverse congregations. And then I've put some fun Swahili words here that I think are important to know and that our students have taught us. So Jambo is a greeting that you can share if you're speaking with somebody who speaks Swahili as their first language. Karibu is welcome, which is another important one for us as staff to know, as well as some other words. So just a little background there. Becca, I am timing myself, but feel free to kind of cut me off if I get to a point that I need to stop, okay? So now I'm just going to share a little bit of information about our efforts and about the issue. Yeah, I hope that you find this interesting and enlightening. So for over a decade, our refugee resettlement agencies in Philadelphia have welcomed families from East and Central Africa, the countries that we saw, to Philly, many of whom were fleeing violence from those countries. And like I said, we receive a lot of Congolese refugees. So while many of these folks identify as native speakers of a variety of languages like Kinyarwanda, Kinyabwisha, and other languages, Swahili is the most commonly spoken language. In over 8 African countries, we named some of them, Swahili is an official or secondary language for day-to-day conversation and commercial activities. Despite the consistent growth of this community in Philly, efforts to support the effective integration of multilingual families and children in this community into public education have still been pretty grossly insufficient. Kathy did share with you in the quiz, there are, out of the 95 BCAs, none of them do speak Swahili, and there is only one BCA who speaks some of those native African languages, more from West Africa. So the lack of representation in the school district is exceptionally striking when you look at the number of BCAs available for any language primarily spoken by Black immigrants. 1. Out of 95 of the BCAs, there is only 1 BCA for French, who also happens to be a speaker of 4 African languages, like I mentioned. Not only does this decrease the quality of service for immigrant parents and children, but it is also disturbingly dismissive of the more than 3,000 languages spoken across the African continent, and there are still new languages being cataloged and discovered. So that's a lot of languages that are not represented. In fact, as shown in more detail, and I'm going to talk about this, the US Census data confirms the district's insistence that there are not enough Swahili speakers or speakers of other African languages to justify hiring a BCA is completely baseless. So the way that the district works is when a student is enrolled, they catalog and record the home language, and the district is basically saying, we don't have enough speakers of Swahili to justify hiring a BCA. That is the argument currently. It's a glaring example of the lack of BCAs who speak languages spoken by thousands of Black immigrants in Philly, such as Haitian Creole, which is not the same as French, and Yoruba. There are no BCAs who speak those languages either. And it's also exacerbated by the situation of most Swahili speakers. So we have to consider the situations in the context and in which we're receiving folks from Swahili speaking areas. Since many of the families in this community have come to Philly after being displaced from their homes for an average of 10 years. So we're thinking about families who left home, were kind of in limbo for 10 years, maybe living in a refugee camp or an urban area or somewhere else, right? Their children have experienced inconsistent and interrupted education. So it's really, it's not that we're receiving folks who are, leaving home country and coming from a situation where their children were in school up until the time that they left to come to the United States. Most of our kids that are Swahili speakers have been out of school, interrupted education for a number of years. Parents have experienced little experience building bridges with their children's teachers, and the students' experiences of displacement and migration involves trauma of living through war, living through famine and persecution. So Swahili-speaking students need extra support that a BCA can supply. Not only the much needed language access and interpretation and translation, but also that cultural bridging that's really important in school communities and providing an extra level of connection between Swahili-speaking students and the families in the school system. So what we've asked the district, it's kind of a twofold ask. So the first ask is that they should immediately hire a Swahili-speaking BCA to serve the needs of Philadelphia's Swahili-speaking population. But after much discussion, we decided there should be a second ask. We actually asked the school district to reassess the current language inequity among communities that are provided with BCAs, because it's obvious that Black immigrants have been systemically overlooked when it comes to being provided BCAs. And I mentioned Haitian Creole and Yoruba as 2 languages that are spoken by many, many families in Philadelphia and are not represented by a BCA. So we did interviews with folks in the community, parents, teachers, other school district staff themselves, other community organizations that work specifically with African immigrants, and gathered a number of really powerful testimonies about the need for a BCA, and have brought that data and that information to the school district and are kind of continuing this somewhat uphill battle, I will say. This has been something that's been on the docket in the 5 years that I've been at HIAS Pennsylvania and is still an ongoing ongoing challenge. I'm excited to share a little bit more in the breakout session, but I'll take any questions if anybody has any right now. And if you'd like to type the questions in the chat, maybe that's the easiest thing since there are so many of us. Yes, BCA stands for Bilingual Counseling Assistant.
Valerie?
Yes.
Hi, this is Angela. I met you over the summer.
Oh, hi, Angela. Hey.
I was wondering, when you say you have brought this to the district, who
Yes.
have you brought it to? To the FACE office or to somebody else higher? Or who
Yes. Great question. So, so we have really, I'm proud of our really positive relationship that we have with the School District of Philadelphia. So we have historically, I'm going to admit this person. We've historically gone to the folks who are kind of within the FACE office, but not the director of FACE. So we've gone to the supervisor of the bilingual counseling assistants, the director of the Office of Multilingual Curriculum and Programming, who are our allies and longtime friends. And we just haven't been able to get anywhere because the response we get is, we know, we hear you, we take this issue to our supervisors and nothing comes of it. So with Kathy's support, we've actually gone to the director of the FACE office, as well as the chief academic officer at the school district. And so really, I don't know, Kathy, if you want to share a little bit about their response to the letter that we submitted, but it was quite a delayed response. And we're kind of at the point now where we are looking to potentially bring in members of city council and kind of other outside support.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm happy to add to what Val has shared. So one of the problems, which is why, as Val discussed, we increased our asks from 1 to 2 asks, is because we discovered in advocating with several school district officials that one of the major reasons that they have been slow to move, just not only on our request, but in general, why they have 95 BCAs and only 1 who speaks African languages, is because the way that they assign BCAs is based on an internal survey that they conduct. The survey is conducted with parents as they register their children with the school district, but the survey is conducted in English. And they say things like, are you comfortable in English? Well, that seems like an innocent enough statement. But if you understand, as Val and her team does, and as those of you who are on this call who've been working with our clients do, that statement, are you comfortable in English, is really a very loaded statement. Our clients, many of them have fled persecution based on a variety of reasons. So any kind of official, and believe me, a school district staff person is seen as an official by our clients, who says, are you comfortable, is met by an immediate yes. Because the fear that if they say no, they will be someone who is not going along with the program, someone who's a troublemaker, someone who's exposing their own ignorance. There are myriad reasons why someone would say yes instead of no to that question, regardless of the reality. So it's not an accurate count. And we put in the chat a document that we prepared for the district with help from several community-based organizations to show them that their data is simply not accurate. It does not mirror all of the other data that has been collected by both the federal government, the state government, and the local government regarding who makes up our community in terms of different language speakers. So, so the district's response has been, okay, fine. We understand we have to take a second look at our data, and okay, fine. We understand we need a Swahili speaker, but we have no funding and we have no time. And so here's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah, and to kind of like add to that, as Kathy said, I mean, our department at HIAS PA, we handle all school enrollments for our newly arrived refugee children and their families, and we call Language Line ourselves when we help a family enroll and fill out the application, or if we're lucky enough to be at the district office and someone's available, they will call Language Line. But that home language survey, if that's filled out incorrectly at the beginning, that means that that student's data is entered incorrectly, and that stays with them. And so when the district goes to gather that data from the system and it's incorrect in there, and no one's taking the time to correct that data, it just stays there. And then they say, oh, well, there are only 2 Swahili speakers at this school, when in fact there are 80 or 90, something like that. Just 2 questions if I have time. Becca, do I have time to answer some of these questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the first two questions I see here. Could you talk a little bit more about what BCAs do on a day-to-day basis? The ones who speak the less represented languages must be stretched very thin. Yes, that is, I second that last point there. And then to the question. So BCAs do a number of things. They are not, what's really important to note is that they're not meant to be classroom assistants. So the role of the BCA, primarily is to bridge the cultural and linguistic gap, or I should say just to be the cultural and linguistic bridge between schools and families. So this comes into play when a teacher or a staff member at a school needs to reach out to a family, or is looking to host a workshop and wants to make sure that it's inclusive and representative and includes the families who speak languages other than English. And so that might mean that the BCA is helping to contact those families about coming to that meeting, coming to that workshop, speaking with a teacher. Oftentimes that bilingual counseling assistant is doing interpretation in person, live, consecutively during that meeting. BCAs can do translations as well. There is an office at the school district that can receive requests to do translations, just because they are really time consuming, but BCAs can do this depending on the schools that they're assigned to. Something that's really important to note, BCAs are assigned to schools based on the percentage of students who speak that language. And I'm not talking about the percentage of parents who speak the language, which is data that the district does not collect, unfortunately, right? Because you can have a child who maybe is more proficient, might test out of ESL and no longer be identified as a speaker of their first language, or I should say a primary speaker, but the parents might still be beginner level English language speakers, right? So another piece of that. But the BCAs are assigned to schools based on that number. And so a lot of BCAs are rotating to a different school each day. So they're building relationships with families across several different schools. Another thing that happens is the BCA works really closely with the counselor to support and find ways of directly supporting the students who speak that language. And so whether that's social emotional support, again, reaching out to families, including them, really they're involved in, they're kind of they're a really important glue you can think of within the school community, and are really, really crucial to creating that school community family connection. Are there enough qualified people in all of the needed languages to fill these BCA positions? So this is a really good question. The qualifications are pretty steep, right? So the former director, she just retired, but who oversaw and supervised these 95 BCAs, had a pretty rigorous process for hiring folks in this position. So not only do you need to be able to interpret, and of course they're not assuming that you are a certified interpreter at the outset, but there is training that goes on for new BCAs, but you have to be fully literate in both English and that language in order to be able to do site translations and regular translations. And so your proficiency in English and that language has to be really high, and your level of comfortability with going back and forth has to be really high. And so the other really sad part about this is that BCAs are paid less than $25,000 a year. So everything I just talked about, the fact that they're the glue, they're crucial, they're important, teachers and staff rely on them heavily, families consider them sometimes the only point of contact they have, it's not reflected in how they're compensated. So another piece of this is lifting them up and the work that they do. And so there's so much to do around this, but they are crucial and important. Yes, Language Line is a call service that the school district actually budgets for and pays for. Unfortunately, there is no formal training that happens for teachers when they are hired on how to use Language Line. So we ourselves as advocates are often finding ourselves doing Language Line training for teachers because that's often not something that district staff do for them. But Language Line is something that is paid for by the school district and that every single teacher and staff member has access to.
Well, thank you, Val. I'm sure there's a lot more questions and discussion to be had. There is going to be a Swahili speaking BCA language group breakout session when we get to that portion. But that talking about Language Line specifically and that service and the training is a perfect segue to my part of the presentation. I am actually talking for our health coordinator, Megan Hume, who sadly wasn't able to be here with us today. But what I'm going to talk about is specifically language access in pharmacies. So I want to start with the legal context. There's a lot of confusion about, as you saw in the opening questions, about what's required and what's not required. So to be very clear, there is a federal law. It's Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VI prohibits discrimination by those who receive federal assistance. The discrimination specifically that is prohibited is based on race, color, or national origin, I apologize. And receiving federal assistance can mean any program or activity that receives federal assistance. So with respect to pharmacies, preparing and selling prescriptions are included in this because most pharmacies accept Medicaid and Medicare as payment. So that's your federal assistance hook. The Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, what has been popularly discussed as Obamacare, is a regulation that expands Title VI, and the expansion reiterates the language of Title VI and makes explicit the requirement that certain entities use interpreters. And those entities listed are federally administered programs, Medicare, the federally facilitated marketplace, the entities that were created under Title I of the Affordable Care Act, the state marketplaces, and qualified health plans. So this Section 57 has to do primarily with the things that were created as a result of the Affordable Care Act to make it absolutely clear that certainly any new creation has to provide language access. It does not disturb in any way the original Title VI requirements of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which I just mentioned. There are state and local laws which require state agencies, courts, and city agencies to provide language access, but it's the federal law that applies to pharmacies because pharmacies are private entities. Okay, so what's the problem? Why are we talking about this today? What's the issue? It's clear, as I just said, that pharmacies who accept medical and Medicaid and Medicare must provide language access or risk being sued for a violation of Title VI. Do pharmacies not have access to language services such as Language Line, which we were just talking about? Is this a problem confined to mom and pop pharmacies? Surely the larger chains like CVS, Walmart, Walgreens, Rite Aid, all have interpreter services, don't they? Well, the short answer is no and yes. No, this is not limited to mom and pop pharmacies, but yes, all of the pharmacies, including the big chains, seem to have interpreter services available. So what's the problem? The problem, as reported by our clients, are as follows. The problems, multiple. So let me give you some scenarios. A non-English speaking or limited English speaking client goes to a pharmacy to pick up a prescription. Upon reaching the register, the client is able to say no English. In response, the pharmacist or clerk shouts, gestures, and ultimately shrugs that they can't help. A non-English speaking or limited English speaking client goes to a pharmacy, is able to ask for their medication, but then is told that the medication is out of stock and or must be ordered because it's unique and not normally kept on site. The client, not understanding, expresses confusion, conveys the fact that their English is limited, is subsequently shouted at, dramatically gestured at by the pharmacist or clerk, and ultimately turned away with a shrug. Third scenario, a non-English speaking or limited English speaking client goes to a pharmacy and asks for a medication. The pharmacist asks for their insurance. The client turns over their insurance card and the pharmacist informs the client that the insurer requires prior authorization before the prescription can be filled. The client is confused and explains their limited English and lack of understanding. The pharmacist then shouts, gesticulates wildly, and failing to communicate effectively, shrugs and sends the client away. A non-English speaking or limited English speaking client goes to a pharmacy, asks for a medication, turns over their insurance card. The pharmacist looks at the insurance card and realizes that the insurance is not yet activated. This is explained to the client, who does not understand and conveys his or her confusion to the pharmacist. The pharmacist shouts, gesticulates wildly, and finally in frustration, shrugs and sends the clients away. So these are the stories we're hearing from our clients over and over again. Why? When we know pharmacists have interpretation services available, what is the actual problem? Our investigation has uncovered the fact that while all pharmacies in line with Title VI have interpretation services available, there's little to no training about how and when to use interpretation services. Furthermore, when new hires are onboarded, no reference to the interpretation services, their ability, how and when to use them, is made during their onboarding process. No records are kept regarding customers whose prescriptions are not filled, so there's no internal data regarding the numbers of customers who aren't served as a result of this lack of training. Implications aside from the obvious are far-reaching public health consequences. Customers that are unable to communicate with their pharmacist cannot know about other services, such as flu shots and COVID-19 vaccines that are available. They cannot know about drug interactions or side effects. They are also not provided with any written instructions in other languages because they are turned away before the language of the customer is established. So, and somebody wrote in the chat, and I appreciate this, pharmacy staff are usually so overburdened. They don't have time to deal with anything that slows them down. I appreciate that comment, Meryl, and I think it brings us to a parallel with the BCA situation, right? As Val described, they're stretched so thin and they're underpaid. Well, I think similarly, we have a problem on the front lines of people who are working in healthcare, people who are working in essential services, who are overstretched, underpaid, and not trained adequately. So we wanted to uplift this issue because it really, particularly in this time of the pandemic, is a public health issue. And so we want to work today in the breakout sessions after the group. Those who are interested in working on this issue will follow me into a room so that we can brainstorm about different approaches. Certainly through Title VI, we can sue them, but the law, as people say, as is a common expression, is a blunt instrument. And so suing isn't going to get us immediate relief and isn't going to get to those nuanced problems like training and onboarding and addressing the needs of frontline workers who are overstretched and deprioritize the needs of any client who needs more than a minute's worth of time. So that's where we are. And that's the highlight of the issue. Do people have questions? You can either put them in the chat or you can ask me. Self-explanatory. Okay. While since there aren't questions, and before I turn it over to our senior staff attorney to talk about right to counsel, I wanted to highlight two things that I should have done in the beginning. So I apologize. First, I never introduced myself, I realized. I'm Catherine Miller Wilson. I'm the executive director of HIAS Pennsylvania. I think I know most of you, which is why I forgot, or that's my excuse for forgetting. But for those of you who didn't know me, I am really, really happy to see you and really happy to welcome you. The second really important thing, which we neglected to say, is that we are recording this session. So we should have said that in the beginning. We are saying it now. Our purpose is so that we can share it with others. If anyone has a concern or objection about being recorded, please chat with me privately. If you go into the chat, you can find my name and you can send me a concern that you have about being recorded. So, anyway, that is the business that I neglected. I'll give one more chance for questions, and then otherwise I will turn it over to Io. Any questions? Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce you to our senior staff attorney, Io Del Gonzalo. Io is an amazing litigator and advocate. She has been advocating on behalf of immigrants and refugees for more than 20 years. And is really a very well-renowned expert on the needs of immigrants and refugees. So I'm thrilled to have her join us and talk about this very specific problem of right to counsel.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That always makes me uncomfortable, but that's okay. I'm glad to see so many people joining us today. This is, really wonderful. It's glad to see that people really care about the work that we do. I'm going to ask a question. How many people believe that there is a right to counsel for those in immigration court proceedings? Just show of hands. I see lots of people shaking their heads, and I can see at least one person holding their hand up. And actually, there is a right to counsel in immigration court proceedings, but that's at your own expense, not a government expense, right? So, and that's an important proviso, because if you think about the criminal justice system, no one would be able to go into a criminal proceeding without a counsel if they couldn't afford it. Clearly, immigrants are treated very differently. How many people think that children have a right to counsel or are given counsel in immigration court proceedings? Yeah, I can see. Yeah, it would be nice, but unfortunately, even immigrant children are not represented. I remember, I can't remember how many years ago, but Judge Weil, who is one of the detention court judges, was in an interview where he said that even a child of 3 could represent themselves in immigration court proceedings. And whenever I do training, I always say, yes, it takes them about 21 years, but they can represent themselves in immigration court proceedings. So we talk about giving people the right to counsel, but actually not making that possible. And some of the things that we have been doing, I'll talk about that in a moment, is to focus on how we can provide more representation for those who are detained. Now, why do we want to do that? If you think about it, for somebody who is detained, their ability to represent themselves effectively is minimalized. They have no opportunity to gather the documents that they need to support their application. Even filing an application, if they're not represented, can be a challenge. Even knowing that there are immigration benefits available to them is a challenge. Immigration court judges actually want people to come into their hearing with a representative. That's because they actually do believe in the notion of due process. And if somebody comes into a hearing with a lawyer, the judge can then feel that he or she will know what the issues are so that they can make a proper decision about whether or not someone should be deported. And when we're talking about people being deported, we're not just talking about people who are recent immigrants. We know about the people that are coming at the southern border, and they are moved fairly quickly through the system to determine whether or not they get to stay. But you're also talking about people who are detained, who've been in the United States for many, many years, sometimes decades, who've built up lives for themselves, have children here, have no connection to another country. And so when we're talking about deporting people, well, anyone, we really should be thinking about what is it that this person is trying to say about their ability to remain in the United States. And when we don't give them the opportunity to be represented, we're essentially saying that we want to move them through the system as quickly as possible, and to expose them to deportation when actually maybe they do have relief, and the ability to be represented would allow them to really prosecute present that relief effectively. So talked about the fact that the importance of representation, and the American Immigration Council, which is the legal arm of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has noted that through a study, 2016 study, that people who are represented were 5 times more likely to obtain legal relief in immigration court, 5 times. And that people who were detained were 10.5 times more likely to succeed. Just think about that. Those are substantial numbers, substantial difference. But there are so many ways that those who are detained are disadvantaged. And one of them is simply in relation to where the detention facilities are located. How many people think that there's an immigration detention facility in Philadelphia? The closest immigration facility is in York, at least 2 hours away. Matt, who I think is on the call, who is our fellow doing detention work, is representing a number of clients in Allenwood. How many people know how far Allenwood is from here? It's about 5 hours. So if you think about it, in some ways, because we're a nonprofit, we're fortunate enough to not have to think about the fact that representing a client in Allenwood means a whole day's worth of travel in the days when we could travel, right? But if you're a private attorney, you really have to think about whether or not that's economically viable for you and your business. And there are very few people in the Allenwood area that do immigration work and can provide representation. So we're now in the age of the pandemic, right? COVID. And we've all discovered that actually there's so much more we can do virtually that we didn't think that we could do before, right? HIAS shifted very neatly into providing representation to clients virtually. How many people think that it is possible, well, that there are any detention facilities that provide virtual access to detainees? There is one facility, which is York. And the cost of a video call is, well, as you can imagine, it's a business, right? So it's substantial. When we're now not able to go into the facilities, you would think that there would be more ways for us to make a connection with clients. And in fact, there are so many ways in which there are obstructions to just even get a call with a client. In immigration law, representing the detained is one of the most dynamic because these cases are heard very, very quickly. I mean, we're talking about the right to representation, but even if you do have a representative, that representative is having to move at quick speed in order to be prepared. So I don't know, Matt, do you want me to just go through to explain some of the problems? Do you want to speak for yourself about some of the problems you've had with getting enough time to prepare for a case?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to touch on that. And just to introduce myself briefly, so I'm Matt Egler-D. Ferdinando. I'm a fellow working at HIAS on the removal defense team through the Independence Foundation. A lot of what I just talked about I'm dealing with day to day too, but I can use one of my cases as an example. So I've been representing an individual detained at Allenwood who first reached out to us back in October, I believe, for assistance with her case, which had been scheduled for December. So as I just talked about, a really quick timeline. Obviously, making contact as often and as easily as possible is essential to her case. And it took the better part of about 3 months to arrange a call because, you know, as I have said, it's difficult to get in touch with anyone. And even when you do get in touch with someone at these facilities, you have to figure out what the ins and outs are of arranging a call. So I've directed from one person to another, fax to this person, email to that person. And by the time I was able to speak with the client, it was already about 2 weeks before her case had been scheduled originally. So we're now on our third continuance in the case. It hasn't really gotten any easier to get in touch with this client over time. And as I have said, you'd think that with everything going on, it would just make so much sense to arrange virtual ways to connect with these clients. But if anything, I found that it's just made things more difficult to do. So, and you know, that's just one story, whether it's at Allenwood, whether it's at Clinton County Correctional Facility, where I have a lot of clients right now as well. You're going through the same things. And so you're really fighting an uphill battle just to get in touch with these clients, let alone get any documents to them or be able to have sort of tangible ways of preparing. Even when I have arranged these calls at most facilities, it's limited to about a half an hour. And to really prepare for any hearing in a half an hour is just unrealistic. So it forces a lot on the clients too, because it means that there's less time for us to talk about what we're going to talk about. And earlier today, I know that we talked a little bit about a trauma-informed approach. And for so many of these detainees, just being there is a traumatic event day to day, right? And so it really doesn't afford me or afford the client the time to prepare for what we're talking about. We kind of have to get into it right away. And that makes for harder conversations for them and more difficult preparation for us. So I'm happy to add anything else, Io, but that's what comes to mind.
No, but I think, you know, that really highlights some of the problems that, well, both on the representative side, but also psychologically for those that are detained. And this is really, truly a major issue. So we want to just shift to thinking about what can we do about this, right? And so what has been happening around the country is that some states and localities have been identifying the need to provide representation for those who are detained. In a similar vein to those that are in the criminal justice system. And just remember that a number of the people that are detained have already been through the criminal justice system, right? So this is the second phase. They've spent the time that has been imposed upon them for whatever they might have done. And they're now having to fight for their lives to be able to remain in the United States. But this time they're going through it, if they're lucky, with a representative, and as we know, you know, many of them don't even have that. So how do we get to change that? So New York, pioneer, began this program where they decided that they would work with both public and private funders to set up a fund that would allow them to provide an attorney so that there would be representation at immigration hearings. This sparked an interest in us, and Kathy's been working with NSC and other, Nationality Service Center. We always talk in acronyms and we forget that people don't know what we're talking about, with other organizations to create a similar fund. And this is the Pennsylvania Pennsylvania Family Unity Project, PIFAB. And through this project, or through the money that has been raised so far, There is, I believe, Kathy, at least one person that's funded. That's Lila, correct? And the hope is that there will be continued growth in that funding. We really did have a little bit of a scare last year when City Council was going through its budget. And as you can imagine, with COVID, there had to be some significant cuts in what it was planning to spend. And there was a real risk that they were going to cut funding for PIFAP. And fortunately, we were able to advocate and help them to see that this was something that was absolutely vital. And the other thing that you must, that I'd like you to sort of understand is that, yes, we're spending this money, but actually it saves money, right? If you're represented, you can, the whole process goes so much more smoothly. So it's, what is it that my mother says, penny wise, pound foolish. So we really do need to think about how we advocate to get more money into the fund so that we can have more and more people that are providing representation. We've been fortunate. The Independence Foundation has funded Matt to work with us for the next 2 years, or for 2 years. But every agency, not just in Philadelphia, but in other areas, especially in the areas where there are deserts, we need to think about how we provide representation to those who are detained. How much more time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay. Wow. So I'm sorry, I'm not checking to see if there are any specific questions for me in the chat. But if you do have a question for me, please feel free to just raise your hand, let me know. But we have a new administration, and so it was really interesting in the breakout room that I was in. One of the questions was, why are you here? And somebody said, I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but they said that this is a new era. And so therefore we need to look at what we can be doing to make the lives of immigrants much more, to allow immigrants to know that they are welcome here. We've spent the last 4 years demonizing immigrants, making it extremely difficult for them to be able to seek representation, to come to the United States. We need to start putting pressure on the Biden administration to work to reverse so much of what that has happened. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has been extremely effective in dismantling so much of what has been built over decades. And so now we have to work very diligently and quickly to try to reverse a good deal of this, because people's lives are at stake, and we need to be part of that. So I think one of the things that we can talk about in terms of what we can do is to think about how do we work with local municipalities, private businesses, to encourage them to think about contributing to a fund that will help us to continue to represent. And I understand that this is going to be a difficult time, because clearly the pandemic has devastated so many people. And so, people may think that this is not something that is important, but absolutely it is.
All right. Thank you so much, Io. Because we are at time, I'm going to ask people to hold their questions. We are going to take a 5-minute break, because as we've all learned, Zoom calls are exhausting. So we need to take a 5-minute break. When we come back, what we're going to do is break into breakout rooms by subject. So you will have a choice. You will see the labels, and you'll be able to join the breakout room that addresses the topic that you are most interested in. And we're going to have a significant more time to brainstorm solutions and talk about all the different ways that we can kind of get at the problems that have been raised. So hopefully that has been enlightening. And of course, if you have a question that you didn't get a chance to ask, you may ask them in the subject. Well, that was fun. I don't know about the rest of you, but my group had a really lively and fun discussion. So I want to take the time to do a report back. Even though we had sort of self-sorted into groups of interest, I think it's important for all of us as advocates to hear about what other groups have thought about for their issue, because some of it may be translatable. So I'll start with the Swahili speaking BCA group. If somebody has identified themselves as a reporter, if they could report back on some of their solutions or proposals.
Yeah, Kathy, we our time went really, really fast, and maybe I didn't manage it very well. So we started getting into the meat of things as we were leaving. But Anne, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I took notes on some of your responses to the recommendations and the suggestions we already have and the things we've tried. Would you mind sharing with the group some of the additional suggestions you offered?
Yes, I said that I thought it was very important on the ask to assess the number of BCAs needed for the Swahili speakers, that you not ask them to reassess everyone. That's on the district. That's not HIAS's problem. And I also think that it's important to push it, and I know that that HIAS has other priorities with the district, but this is an ongoing priority, and we should just treat it as such and push hard and go to the school board, go to HIAS. You've had 6 months of dicking around with them, so go for it.
Thank you, Anne. Yes. And Kathy, I would just add that I think you had mentioned in the beginning MLK's quote, right, about bending the arc towards justice, right? And I think it's a long road. And I think we've seen it's a really big arc for us, and it's a long road. And Anne just emphasized the need to be incredibly persistent. And I just shared with everybody that, you know, we decided we wanted to kind of do this from the bottom up. And so we said, all right, we can assume we're probably not going to get much of a response from these folks because they're kind of middle level supervisors, but we're going to start with them so that we can say, hey, we went to you and we went up the chain. And so that was a good reminder just to be persistent.
Great. Thank you. All right. I guess that shifts to my group and pharmacy language access. Oh, before I move on, Sandy asked an excellent question. Would it help to have additional public pressure from the other advocacy groups? And so Val, I'm gonna toss that toss that to you.
Yeah, Sandy, it's a good question. I think that we tried to make this a community-based organization conversation. So the letter that we have submitted to the district includes, we've had about, I think, 8 other community organizations that signed on that we regularly work with. And then in addition to that, interviewed several parents, several, clients that we work with, and tried to have it be a collaborative effort and included voices from some teachers as well. And we know that we have to kind of protect their anonymity in some ways. But I would say, I think that Anne's thought about strategizing going to the school board is a good one. And from the school board meetings that I've attended where we've pushed for certain things, what really helps is when there are outside voices kind of stuffing and filling up all of those speaking spots at the school board meeting. So I think that's a time when additional outside voices could be really helpful. And that's going to take some organizing on our part. But I think if we go that route, it'd be great to have some additional voices. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I did want to, oh yeah, and I want to lift up Anne's comment. Testifying is empowering for those who choose to participate, especially students. And absolutely, that's something we want to do. Because we are short on time, I am going to not put anybody in my group on the spot. I took notes, and so I'm going to just run through the fabulous recommendations that we got fairly quickly. Note that the notes, I am going to circulate the notes. They'll be circulated either later today or tomorrow to everybody who attended. So don't worry if I go through kind of quickly. I just want to be respectful of your time. So as I said, we got lots of great recommendations. One, writing up a COVID instruction sheet in a variety of languages. Make sure that every large pharmacy has it, would allow them to simply give out sheets and would make life simpler for everybody. And two, moving the burden to the clients, but in a way that is effective. So, for example, putting a phone in the front and an instruction sheet in several languages that tells clients that when they don't speak English, they can dial the code and ask for their language and put them on speakerphone. And then related to that, an ER doc who is part of our group told us of this fabulous thing that he has in his ER, which is posters with a QR code in multiple languages in the waiting room, so that people can actually access the language service that they need on their own phone, and then just, put them on speaker, go up to the front desk. So that was a great idea. Another idea, in light of the COVID emergency, does that make this a way to bring it to more people's attention, what the issues are? We should bring it to the health department's attention. We had a representative from Delaware County, an elected official, who was unaware of this issue. And so she was suggesting that there really needs to be a lot more government awareness about the breakdown. And so we should inform county commissioners, city council people, and of course, departments of health, and connect it to COVID, particularly if pharmacies are going to receive funding in order to distribute the vaccine. We should use that funding, put a piece of it in for training regarding the use of interpretation services. And that can be a building block for beyond the pandemic. Another person suggested we can adapt to things when we need to, and that's what we've learned from the pandemic. So we need to be better at using technology. What happens when Language Line doesn't work? What happens when a person speaks a dialect that Language Line doesn't handle? The court system, which this person had worked in, had training, and acknowledging that this is a major issue is a huge first step. Then another thing that was mentioned, which was very helpful, was that research that has been done shows that while both large chain pharmacies and small mom and pops have issues, they are responsive to different incentives. So chains are responsive to corporate pressure. Mom and pops have different incentives for addressing the needs of their clients. We should find out if there's a joint commission for pharmacies and we could serve as a whistleblower for pharmacies that aren't following the rules. Also, again, technology. In ERs, there's a rolling iPad that's actually cheaper to use and allows for a person to see the face of the interpreter, which makes interpretation a lot easier. And we should tell pharmacies about this. So, and then another person brought up communicating with pharmacy schools. Students are in the do-gooder phase of their lives. This is a way to get underserved populations vaccinated. And how can we do that with the rollout? Bridge the human resources gap with students and make sure that language services are available. Ensure that this is taught in pharmacy school. And then also ensure that the message is widely spread by government, by schools, and by the public, so that it reaches everyone, not just pharmacists, but clerks and staff and frontline people. So those were all really, really great solutions that that we want to follow up on. And as I said, that will be sent to you after the program. So now I just want to turn it over to IO's group and the Right to Counsel to see what kinds of things they had. And then we can wrap it up.
Wow, Kathy, you guys really got to discussing. There was a lot there. Also, just because you said that we're short on time, and I was taking notes, so if it's okay with my group, I'll just cover some of the things that we talked about. It was a really useful conversation around how to really start the work to expand the funding that's available to provide representation for those that are detained. And we talked about, should we be looking to the Biden administration? Should we be starting smaller in Pennsylvania? One of the ideas was that we should start in Pennsylvania because then that would give us leverage to then sort of build out, if you like, so that it's a national strategy. Joanna was helpful, mentioned that there was some legislation in New Jersey last year where about $6 million was made available for representation of the detained. Was it the detained, Joanna, or just representation in general?
I think it was specific to detained.
For the detained, yeah. And so just thinking about partnerships with those who were able to lobby to get that, to see what strategies they used, to see if there are things that we can then adopt in whatever work we decide to follow. We talked about the metrics, about how the having representation reduces costs all round, and so in the presentation we should be thinking about bringing that forward, and Dorian was very helpful because she was helping us to see that yes, it's really important to be talking about metrics and the social impact of detention, but we also need to be thinking about how we do this in a way that we are making it concrete through storytelling, because then people really do get to understand what the issues are involved. When we were discussing, we were thinking about, given that so much energy is needed for this work, should we be focused on vulnerable groups? And everybody thought that children were not only a vulnerable group, but they were also sympathetic. And so using them as the way to bring forward these conversations would allow us to not only talk about economics, but also bring in the emotional sort of focus to the conversation. And Matt was very helpful in saying that, well, when we're talking about the impact, particularly when we were talking about children, not to just think about children who are detained, but also think about the impact on families of those who are detained, right? Because there's a loss of income, there's a loss of emotional support, and there's so many things that come out of or that are affected by detention. And Jordan was also helpful in helping us to think about the ripple effect on the community when you have someone who's detained and so therefore not able to contribute. You're on mute, Kathy.
Sorry. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We've covered obviously a lot of ground, and we've done it in a short time. So what is the conclusion to all of this? So first of all, I hope that everybody on this call has learned something that they can take back to their families and friends. Second of all, I hope that people are re-energized in terms of solutions. And to that end, Rebecca's going to put in the chat a link to a somewhat hokey thing, if you'll forgive me, that I drafted for today called a commitment letter. The commitment letter is really just something that you can all take with you from today. And if you want to click on it right now while you're in the chat, it will open up on your tab a letter where you can check off what you are committed to doing to address some or all of these issues. It's really purely for you to kind of really give you more than the vague, like raw which can often happen. I know that life gets in the way. We're all very, very busy. But we hope that you'll consider checking off one or more of the activities, signing the letter, and following through on your commitment. And we hope you'll take a picture of it and send it to us so that we can celebrate the number of commitments that we got from today. We are going to stay on for anyone who wants to, totally voluntary. Kathy,
can I just say, Becca, I think you need to make that an open document because there's no access to it at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, will do. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. So anyone who wants to, totally voluntary, can sit with us, and we're going to write some letters to commissioners, city council people, and state legislators about PIFUP. And we're really doing that because we recognize in this age of pandemic, we all feel a little isolated and alone. So, so if it's more fun for you to write letters in group, we love to encourage fun because advocacy should always involve fun. So you can feel free to do that. If you don't have time, then please feel free to drop off. And thank you again for joining us and sharing your ideas. We really had a great time and we learned a lot from all of you, and we'll be sharing everything that we did today by email. So take care.